Yes, hello, welcome everybody. Welcome people in the room, people watching from the live stream, to our next panel called Shifting Narratives, Journalism about AI that Centers on People and Communities. Our panel consists today of a distinguished group of journalists and researchers who have not only challenged powerful institutions, but have also prompted critical questions about AI. Questions such as who holds the power over AI and also who is left out. And these experts have expanded the scope of traditional tech news to spotlight those on the margins and the underdogs who are defying expectations. And here to host this wonderful conversation is Solana Larsen, editor of the Internet Health Report and the IRL podcast at Mozilla. So give it up for Solana.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the purple couch. This is supposed to be my living room for the next hour, and I have two guests that I'm so excited to introduce. Julia Angwin, who's a journalism hero of mine, Pulitzer-nominated tech reporter for a long time, founder of The Markup, founder of a new journalism initiative called Proof News, and just a very, very exciting person to talk to. And Itika Sharma, who's the deputy editor of a publication called Rest of World, which you should definitely check out if you haven't seen before, a nonprofit news organization covering tech and how it affects people outside of the Western world. We'll hear much more about both initiatives. I want you for a moment to forget the headlines about Apple and about OpenAI and Elon Musk. We're going to be talking about AI and journalism, and not about how journalists are using AI. That's a different conversation for a different time. We're talking about how journalists cover AI, how they cover machine learning, how they cover algorithms that make decisions in our lives, how technology, including AI, affects people all around the world, and how journalism should respond to that and cover that. And so, I guess, by way of introduction, I wanted to ask both of you to describe a big win that you've had with your newsrooms, and perhaps something like a big win that you've had in the past and something that you're working on currently that can help us understand where you're at right now in your mind and in your work. And Julia, since you're here on Zoom, I think let's start with you to bring you into the room. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for letting me loom over you like Big Brother. I hope it's not too creepy looking. And thank you for framing this conversation around coverage of AI, because I'm constantly being asked about how journalists should use AI, and can I come talk on a panel? And I'm like, well, the answer is just no, so it's a really short panel. So this is a much more interesting conversation. And I think I launched this new newsroom, Proof News, earlier this year, and we started with an investigation of how AI models answer questions about voter inquiries. Basically, whether, if you ask where should I vote or whether I can vote by text, there's very common questions out there that are misconceptions that voter officials know the public has. So we asked all those questions to the models just to get a sense of whether you could trust these things at all. And I know you'll be shocked to discover that they were, majority of the time they gave the wrong answer and often made up really crazy things like, you could vote by text and stuff like that. And so I think what I'm proud of there is that we did those testing, and the companies have been slowly improving their models since then and getting rid of some of those fabrications. And so I'm really pleased that we were able to do that before people probably started asking those questions. The idea was to get ahead of it before our November elections in the US. And I think that it's really important that we hold the companies accountable for this information, because they are claiming that these are intelligence, right? And if they're not even answering a basic question, I think we really, as journalists, have to question them. And then you asked about future coverage. I'm doing a lot of other additional AI work, have a big investigation coming out probably next month. That'll be fun. And also really looking into the climate impacts. I think we have to think, when we think about covering AI, we have to think about the cost, not just financially. Obviously, people are pouring billions of dollars into this technology, but actually water, energy usage is really high for these things when I think the benefits are not yet proven.
Thanks, Julia. And Itika, what about you? What are big wins or things you're looking forward to for Rest of World?
So Rest of World is a small nonprofit newsroom. Like you said, it's focused on telling stories about how tech is impacting businesses, humans, and cultures outside the West. And I feel like the mission that we have and the focus that we have itself is delivering anything within that is a win. So about my work, I am a deputy editor at Rest of World, and my teams lead coverage of from Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. So what we basically do is that we break down these large narratives that we hear in the West about AI and big tech and all of that, and we pressure test them in places like Nigeria or Argentina or India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And we write about stories of people, small businesses, communities, how they are interacting with, say, AI, how they are using it, or how they are suffering because of it, or what that engagement looks like. So in the sense of big wins, Rest of World has been around for around 4 years now. We have written stories about tech impacting communities from over 100 countries so far. And the beauty of these stories are written by local journalists in each of these markets. We work with independent journalists. We're always finding talent who can deliver these stories. So these are people who understand the local cultural nuance. They understand the business, the thoughts, the feelings of these people in these communities. It's not remote journalism, it's on the ground. So right now, for instance, around AI, we are working on a lot of stories around how AI is being used in different African countries, how it's being used in, say, India, in the elections that we all keep talking about, this mega election year. So I believe our big win is to sort of, bring out stories from regions that are typically overlooked, right? Because there's so much conversation and research and reporting and investigation in the US around AI. But we need to understand that it's a technology available to everyone, right? It's on the internet, so everyone has access to it, and everyone will try to use it and experiment with it. All governments, all young population people. So to be able to deliver those stories, some stories of inspiration and how people have used it and made it their own for their benefit, some stories of potential misuse, threat, harm. And you asked about in the future what we're looking at. I think we're constantly looking at doubling down on that sort of, on that coverage. One of the reasons why I'm so excited to be at MozFest is because I'm getting to meet researchers, reporters from different parts of the world, because building that capacity to be able to deliver those stories is very important to us. Because it's not so easy to just find a research report or data in so many parts of the world to be able to deliver those stories. So we need allies, we need people who are in those areas, understand that, and can bring that to us.
I see a lot of people nodding their heads in the room. Julia, I name-dropped the Pulitzer nominations earlier, and you also have bylines with the New York Times and a lot of world-famous publications. But why have you chosen to go the nonprofit route for this kind of journalism?
Yeah, I grew up in for-profit journalism, right? I worked at the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal for almost 15 years. And I basically believe, I think it's pretty clear at this point that the for-profit model is not really working. Essentially, advertising used to be able to support free journalism so that you could basically offer, sell a newspaper for pretty cheap, it was $1 or something to buy the Wall Street Journal. And now advertising just doesn't support it. So most of the quality journalism is going behind paywalls. And I really believe that we're not going to survive as democracy if high quality information is only available to a few people who can afford it. And so I really want there to be great high quality information for the public. And to me, the model for that really just seems to be nonprofit, right? You need basically donors who are focused on bringing high quality information to this ecosystem and want it to be a public good. And right now, I don't see a great funding structure for a public good. Even, The Atlantic, which really was, a benevolent billionaire is supporting, they have gone behind the paywall because they're still trying to make it for profit. And I think we just need high quality information that everybody can access.
And in terms of mission, would you say that part of your mission is changing how tech is built or changing the tech industry itself? I'll ask Julia again first and then you, Idika.
My mission is to bring high quality information to the public and to rebuild trust with audiences. Audiences are rightly, unfortunately, skeptical of mainstream media, and in the U.S. in particular, 3/4 of Americans say they have little or no trust in news. So this is a pretty dire situation that we're in. And so I see my goal there really is to be trustworthy. And the topic of tech is so important. And I'm a accountability journalist. I want to make sure that we hold powerful institutions accountable. And I cannot honestly think of more powerful institutions than these tech companies these days. They literally have more power than most governments. They are essentially nation states. Microsoft has a mission to the UN, just like a country. The EU has diplomats in Silicon Valley just to liaison with these tech companies. So we really are in a situation where these are essentially maybe the world's most powerful actors. And so I'm very focused on accountability. And I'm always happy when we get impact, when our work changes their behavior. But I wouldn't say that's the entire goal, because actually I think the goal really is to educate the public. The public is the one that gets to demand change for society. And so if I can help the public have better facts in order to demand the changes that they want, I don't want to dictate what those changes are. I just want to make sure that they're working with the right information.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And I imagine for you as well, changing tech must come up in your mind, because it's hard to do this kind of reporting without getting mad all the time.
Yeah, getting mad, talk to me about it. But I think, like Julia said, very similar. It's both things. It is accountability. It is also bringing news to reader or information to reader. Accountability in our sense is something I feel like we knew that we wanted to do it at the onset, but we've realized how much of it we can do as we go along. Because in most cases, rest of the world ends up being the newsroom that's writing about a certain issue in that particular country or city or state for the first time, which means we're the first people asking these questions, even to big tech players like the US big tech players. They are constantly being asked questions about similar policies, but so much of that is concentrated, I'd say, in the West, or even in places like India for that matter, where there is a lot of tech reporting, there's a lot of investment in that. But to be able to, for instance, we write a lot about labor issues, gig workers, we're very focused on that. To be able to highlight their issues, and in certain cases, we've actually seen that starting a conversation that this is an issue in South Africa actually takes you somewhere, because it's at times not even intentional, or if it's intentional, they are willing to check. Big tech is willing to check. Players, platforms are willing to check, but no one has asked them. No one has given these people a voice. So I think it's both things, and it is hard to achieve both of these things, but it's also very gratifying.
Mm-hmm. So part of the reason that we're having this conversation is Mozilla is really focused on changing the narrative about AI. It's something that we're working on across a lot of different programs. And I think media is a big part of changing the narrative or the public perception about everything. And Julia, you mentioned trust also. And so I wonder, let's just think about how some of the biggest news organizations in the world are now making licenses with OpenAI. They're selling their content to these big tech organizations, big AI companies, worth hundreds of millions of dollars to help train the next generation of different kinds of AI, or to fine-tune chatbots, that sort of thing. There's the other problem that I think tech reporters are very familiar with, where you're very dependent on sources that work inside tech companies or work at the head of tech companies. So you're also kind of co-opted in terms of how you can cover, how critical you can be. What are your thoughts on that versus the type of journalism that you do? What kind of coverage is it that we're missing or that we can't necessarily rely on mainstream media to deliver?
Yeah, can I take that first?
Go ahead.
Right. I mean, all this also adds to your previous point where I wanted to add was a lot of our work is also about the tech that's being built in rest of world, right? So LLMs that are being built in rest of world, or startups that are being built and funded in rest of world. And those also need to be held accountable. It cannot always be focused on 4 companies or 5 companies, because sometimes these companies in, say, an African company that I was speaking with recently is building an LLM, working with the government. And what are their practices? Because they are entrenched to that system. They are also gathering data, but they're also working with the government. So are their biases seeping in there? And they are building tools in local languages, which are going to have a huge impact on their own population, which does not understand English and does not use English. So I feel like holding those models accountable and making sure that they are not aping the tech pros of the West and trying to position themselves as that. And because these models are built now and they are advancing, but the newer ones that are coming out in whether it's in Africa or whether it's in South Asia or in LATAM, if we can engage with them, or if we can check them sooner than where we are with the other big tech already, it is so essential, because these local language models with local languages will have a massive influence. So in that sense, like, talking about, like, you were asking about the accountability, or like, you were asking
The co-opting.
the co-opting of it. I feel like in our perspective, it is more about these entrepreneurs and these models and these people. Yes, there is this thing about the English language models which are already existing, and constantly seeing the biases and the stereotypes that they are perpetuating. But I feel like a big part for us is also in what's happening in our part of the world, what tech leaders, entrepreneurs, investors are doing there, and sort of holding them accountable and making sure that they don't just replicate the traps that are already existing.
Thanks. Julia?
Yeah, well, this is a big question you've asked, and I think it has a lot of different answers. But I think I'll focus on sort of what I want journalism to do. Because actually, to be honest, I think the tech companies are doing a good job of changing the narrative around AI themselves by putting out such terrible products. And so, I mean, honestly, Google, right, it's so spectacular that their brand name is so good that it's synonymous with the truth. And then they put out this AI search overview thing that was actually allowed every single person to see how far their AI was from the truth, right? And so I honestly think that will be taught in business school case studies for like brand destruction. And so I think they are doing a good job of changing the model of the narrative themselves. But I would say what I think is really important to think about is, journalism and tech are not unrelated topics, right? The reason that journalism is in such a crisis financially is largely due to the fact that the advertising revenue that we used to have has gone to the big tech companies. And add to that, so we've lost all the money. The tech companies have become the gatekeepers to our audience, right? And they are actively hostile, right? Both Meta and X, which are the 2 leading social media companies, are actively hostile to news, right? Facebook is banning news in many jurisdictions, has said it is deprioritizing news in most of its products. X also is, it's hard to even describe what's going on there, but basically, very much deprioritizing news. And so I think journalism has to understand we're operating in a hostile environment here with these tech companies. And so they're actively trying to undermine us because they're big, powerful players, and we are people who challenge power. And so I think it's really important to figure out what is your strategy in that situation, right? And I guess I really think that it's important. I know this is really trite, but I just think it's really important to think of Gandhi. When he was facing the British oppression of India, he said, we need to look within, actually, and like, let's work to take back our own means of production, right? Like, let's make our own cloth. Let's actually collect our own salt. I think that was such a powerful move. And that's what I feel like journalists need to do, is instead of yelling, because we are in a terrible situation and we can just yell about it, but we have to make our product better, and we have to win the war for hearts and minds. And so that's why I'm so focused on rebuilding trust with audiences. I think that honestly, journalists have taken that trust for granted. Like, oh yeah, I'm a journalist, so you should trust me. And I don't think that's true anymore. And so I think we have to really prove to our audiences why they should trust us. Mm-hmm. So what I really focus on is this idea of showing exactly how we did our work. So we have an ingredients label that we put on every investigation, and it tells you, what is our hypothesis? Like, what do we actually think is happening here? What's our sample size? So even if it's interviewing 4 people, that's okay. I want to be honest about it. What did we find? What are our limitations, right? Because there's always limitations. And I think one thing that I also think has been a problem for journalism is we push for the most aggressive headline, the most definitive lead, because that's what's going to draw the audience in. But I think that in today's world, where the audience is deluged with stories in their newsfeed, individual stories, corporate stories, news stories, they're skeptical of that sort of overly certain narrative that we have. And so I want to be more honest with the audience, what we know and what we don't know. And that's really what I'm trying to do with Proof News.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to Julia's point, she's so right. And about you mentioning us turning mad. I feel like this world of liars dividend, this world of everything is AI, and this world of just changing technology is like, right, I mean, we are not engineers. And even if we were, a lot of us graduated colleges 20 years ago. Then tech keeps changing. We're all doing our jobs. There is never enough. None of us have enough time to go study again, train again. You're training on the job. A new technology comes every now and then. And then you have to sort of figure it out and figure out stories around it and figure out how to report it in a world where readers are possibly questioning everything. And it's very easy for anybody to just tweet a story saying, this is fake, this wasn't me, this was my AI clone, this was whatever, developed however. So the job is like becoming so intense because it's now not just the storytelling, it's a lot of checks and balances. Mm-hmm. And you're operating in a scenario where the players want to be opaque. I mean, it riles me, the fact that all the US big tech companies have their biggest audiences in India. Mm-hmm. And if we reach out to them, I've been a journalist in India for 2 decades. If we reach out to them for comments, to ask them what happened, they just do not feel obliged to answer our questions. They just do not seem it's important to do that. And that opaqueness is like so difficult because you don't want to keep telling one-sided stories, but how do you make that story? So there's like on a daily basis trying to engage with these people and convince them to participate and trying innovative ways to poke a hole and get a comment, etc. Also because we don't have policies that are government policies that hold these guys accountable in most of the world. So I can ask them whatever I want and I can keep asking, but it's just one journalist asking.
Yeah, a lot of the time we think of these big tech companies as American companies, but Facebook probably has more users in India. Has a huge user group in Brazil, a lot of parts of the world that we don't think about automatically when we think about these companies or where their decision making really matters.
Yeah. And just the fact that none of these companies even geographically break up their audience on the record, like in a published report or something. Mm-hmm. So if you ask them how many users do you have in India, there's very anecdotal stuff they'll say unless a researcher gets into it and figures out download numbers, login numbers. But most of these companies don't even break up their revenue or their user base by geography.
Mm-hmm. Or their harms. Or
their harms, yeah, which it's in itself is...
Well, Julia also mentioned of like a famous leader of a people's movement. You also talked about policies. We're circling accountability. I wonder if we could talk a bit about social justice movements or people's movements, movements for change, however you want to define it. What are some of the intersections or collaborations that you see that could be really useful or important in the coming years? I mean, I think of the amazing coverage that Rest of World has done around data work, app workers' rights, and the type of collaborations that you could have with labor unions or workers' rights movements. But what are some of the other kind of intersections that are coming up for you in this work?
I feel one of the, obvious one is with researchers, people who are researching in these areas, AI in Mexico, AI in Brazil. One of the things that I have been doing at my newsroom is just to invite researchers to do an AMA with my writers, because also understand that the reporters that we're working with are not, they are independent journalists. In the current media landscape, for them to survive, they are doing anything that will pay. So one they might be writing a political story, another day a cultural story, and now I'm asking them write about a local language model. So I have to also invest in training them, in helping them understand, in helping them figure out the right questions that they should be asking. So I have been getting in touch with researchers and requesting them, can you do a 30-minute Zoom AMA? And let my reporter on the ground in Bangladesh just ask you a few questions because you have been researching. So I feel that kind of capacity building, that kind of training, and that kind of overlap with researchers is very important. And if there's anyone here who's willing to talk to us about it, we'd be very happy to hear and collaborate. The other thing I feel is there's a lot of work being done. When I met Julia a few days ago, I was telling her the kind of work that she does, the stories that she does. I feel like a lot of the narrative in the US about the US has evolved a lot around tech reporting, around AI reporting. We need to bring those lenses to other parts of the world also. And I think those kinds of collaboration where we can invest into doing those similar stories that were possibly done 2 years ago in the US, to recreate in a rest of world context and sort of, tell those stories. All of those, that kind of synergy, that kind of crossover will get us somewhere, will help us push the narrative.
Thanks. Julia, nationally, locally, how would you respond to that?
I think I do already a lot of collaborations with academic researchers in particular. Sometimes people accuse me of being almost an academic myself. Some of my investigations are so nerdy. And so I already do a lot of that type of collaboration. What I'm trying to do right now that I'm actually really excited about is I'm trying to do a different type of collaboration. I believe, as we've talked earlier, I really want to expand the audience and reach people who don't have trust in news, aren't regular news readers. So right now what I'm doing is I've taken the tool that we built for AI testing and I'm collaborating with YouTube and TikTok creators to have them use the tool to essentially do their own investigations in areas that they are experts in. So, I'm talking, for instance, I'm working with a TikToker who's a doctor who kind of debunks medical misinformation. So he's going to use our tool to check a lot of the medical misinformation that he runs across online and see if the AI models are replicating it. And so I think I'm trying to reconceive of the idea of what is it to be a journalist? Do I have to actually write the story myself? Or what if I just bring a tool to somebody who's an expert and then have them test and do their own reporting? And then I will still write up something about it. And I'm going to do a little video interview with him and this and that. But I think I'm really excited about this idea that I don't necessarily have to try to do what journalists usually do, which is try to drive somebody to my website to read an article, right? Because I feel like that's just such a losing game. And these people have audiences already and they want to do things. They just don't have all the tools. So that's what I'm experimenting with right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that resonates very strongly. I think with the Mozilla audience and the way of making tools and building infrastructure that others can adapt to their situation or build on themselves. We're going to have questions in a moment from the audience. You have a moment to think about it. I thought I would allow you to kind of come up with a positive example to end sort of this part of the Q&A session. What are sort of positive use cases for AI and alternative forms of data, perhaps, that you wish were being amplified more? Like you talked about, like, let's not always center the big tech and what's happening, but what are some of the things that give you perhaps hope for how these technologies can be used differently when you do have transparency, when you do have accountability?
Oh, there are so many use cases of AI that we have seen in our reporting that make me so happy that people are doing this. So I will give you an example of this small team of academics called Robots Mali in Mali, which is a West African country. They're a team of 7 or 8 people who had in the past worked with Google to build a local language translation, like English to Bambara language translation model. So last year, Mali changed its official language from French to 7 local languages, or 13 local languages. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting immediately. 13 local languages. And all the school education is still in French. So there has been a serious problem of kids dropping out of school and very high uneducation levels because children are not speaking French at home. But when they go to school, their math notebooks, their English, whatever, their language notebooks, stories, they're all in French. So these people, once last year the government took this decision, started building school materials, books in Bambara. And what they would do is they would take a story, they would generate a story using ChatGPT or generate materials using ChatGPT. Then they would gut check it for taking out stereotypes or taking out materials that are stereotyping them. Then they would use Google Translate to translate it. And then they would use Playground to generate images. And they produced 106 books within a year, which are now being used in school. And that wouldn't have been possible if someone sat down to write every book and publish it. And it's wonderful. And my reporter was speaking to these teams, and they were saying that their books are beautiful, by the way, because they have their own culture, their own people, their own costumes. And kids are learning so quickly because it's not alien to them. It's names they're familiar with. It's anecdotes they're familiar with. Mm-hmm. And this person, one of the researchers said that every time we tried to generate an image on Playground, we'd say, African man, not sexy. Because he said when we said African man, we would get images that stereotype them, right? Men without shirts or muscular bodies. And they were like, we'd have to write a lot of negative prompts to get what we wanted. And he kept telling my reporter about African man, not sexy. And such an inspirational story of how the small group used technology, which is possibly going to influence so many kids in that country. So I have so many. Please read on Rest of the World. We have so many examples of how these small nuggets of how people are using this technology to sort of do their own things within their communities.
To inspire. Julia, what comes to mind for you?
I think translation, like Itika said, is such an important use for these models. And I think it's really important, especially given how little effort that the big tech companies have put into content moderation in other languages. And I think in general, I really think content moderation is a really great opportunity. Right now, as you probably all know, this kind of work that people are doing mostly in the rest of the world are sitting in big warehouses, looking at horrible images and taking them down from different social networking sites. They have PTSD, they get paid very little money. There is an opportunity for AI to help automate some of those things. And so I really have it's not there yet, but I think I have great hope that we could the best view of what could happen with AI is that we automate jobs that no one wants to do and that really are so damaging to humans. Unfortunately, of course, everyone's trying to automate the jobs that people want to do, like art and writing. And I don't want that to happen. But I do hope that we can make that content moderation job better.
Thanks. Do we have any questions for Julia or for Itika?
Yes, over here.
Hello, thank you.
And if you wanted to say who you are, you're welcome to.
I'm Zoe. I work at Privacy Not Included. So I'm asking for advice, actually. When you're writing about AI and reporting on AI, obviously it's very complicated and confusing. So how do you present that information in a way that you can be sure that it's actually going to resonate with consumers and kind of break out of the super techie space?
I can take that first. I feel like, one of the things that I have repeated constantly to all my reporters is that it don't make AI larger than what it should be. Because I will tell you, we started from a place where people were like, this is some magic that's happening. Mm-hmm. So I think, to answer your question, to tell stories that will resonate with people, you really have to break it down, and then you have to just treat it like this is just another story and this is just another technology, and it has to make sense to you. So I feel like as an editor, when I work on a story, I try and figure out that we're not getting swayed by these very large terms like algorithm and AI and machine learning. You really have to be able to understand and make sure that if my 7-year-old was reading it, would understand. And I think you have to take these large looming words like AI and then pressure test them in a small space, figure out what the story is, what the narrative is, what does this mean, and break that what does this mean down until you actually do understand what this means. So it's a lot of not getting swayed by these very big terms and these jargon that's being thrown, or people are trying to haze you into saying we do this, that, the other. Mm-hmm. At the end of it, it's just humans, like Julia said, people sitting every day doing this terrible job of building this platform or whatever, building these models. And their stories is where the story of AI is for me.
And Zoe, who asked the question, mentioned consumers, but I mean, everybody's a consumer, who's like a politician or a tech builder, or it's basically people we're talking about. I wonder, Julia, if you had any kind of tips or rules of thumb for your reporting?
Well, it's hard because I totally agree with you, Itika. We have to try to keep it simple, but I also think that we have a little bit fallen victim to the conflation of multiple technologies under the umbrella of this one term, AI. And the reality is it's being used for everything from robots who are learning how to operate in the physical world to generative AI models, which are really autocomplete on steroids, and then also statistical techniques and machine learning. And so I do think it's helpful to distinguish in an article and not just treat all of AI like one thing, and be really clear, right? This is a, facial recognition, right? This is a certain type of AI really has powered facial recognition, right? Facial recognition used to have a 30% error rate 10 years ago. And then in AI models and statistical techniques have actually made it so that now it's 0.3% error rate. So one of AI's biggest successes is making facial recognition so much better. And so I think it's important to say, when you're writing about facial recognition, this has, they use these techniques for pattern matching to make sure the face matches the other face, and you don't have to even use the word AI if you don't want to, right? I think it's important to just question that word and use it sparingly, and then when you use it, describe it.
That's a good advice. There were a lot of people nodding their heads in the room, Julia. One more question? Yeah, Eliza.
Hello, hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I am Srishti Jaswal, and I am a journalist from India, and I've also worked with Rest of World on many occasions and had excellent collaborations. And this question actually stems from one of the collaboration. Although the stories are from Rest of the World, but it is still written for an American audience, to inform American audience. And sometimes when you shift the focus, then how do you as an editor, especially when we talk about journalism, about AI, deal with these things? How do you balance the local narrative and, also informing the local audience back maybe in India or in some other country, and also keep it for the American audience eventually?
Great question. And maybe short, so we have time for another.
Absolutely. Hi again, Srishti. I feel like a story is a story is a story. So this is something that I do every day, right? I get pitches from you, from other reporters I collaborate with. And there is this notion of you're writing a story with your own context, in your own market, with a basic understanding of everyone knows what this is, and then build above it. So what I have to only do is to make a story more global. I gave examples of so many stories that Rest of the World has done. Everyone was nodding because those are human stories, and we all know those people, no matter where we live. It's in the writing, it's in the way the structure works to be able to explain, because if you have not been to India, where Srishti and I both come from, you cannot understand certain things because there's a madness happening there. So it's a daily challenge. Not a challenge, actually. It's something we take a call on a daily basis on every story, etc. But at the end of the day, it's a story is a story is a story.
That's good.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eliza. I work for CNN. I run our gender team. Thank you both for everything you've said. I wondered about how you, maybe a little bit like the first question, avoid the temptation of the shiny. So we are trained as journalists to, like the adage, man bites dog story, dog bites man, not story. How do you do that with tech when, some of the most sort of insidious users are the more mundane things? So I'll give you an example. My team focused on how gender affects your life online for a year. And we started off by running listening circles just so that we could challenge our own assumptions, because we were more interested in things like rape in the metaverse. Whereas everybody who joined those listening circles said, actually, just gender-based violence on social media platforms or trolling or doxing, things that we thought as journalists, that's been done 1,000 times. But when we were thinking from an impact lens, they were like, people don't understand this enough. How do you navigate that so that you find new stories, but also are not sort of obsessive about what is new and exceptional when most people are harmed by, mundane things?
Great question.
Oh my gosh, if you don't mind, this is like my favorite question. So thank you. So I really believe that the chase for new and novel has actually diminished us as journalists. The reality is we are meant to be watchdogs on power and the voice of the public, right? That is our job. And so many times in my career, I have confronted the reality that the thing that is the most important thing to cover, everybody already knows. So, for instance, one of the most important stories I did in my career was a story about a criminal risk score tool used throughout the United States by judges trying to decide how risky a defendant was. And essentially, it's like a questionnaire they would give to the person who was arrested, and then they would make a determination of literally predicting whether that person was going to commit another crime in the next 2 years. Everybody in the criminal legal system in the United States told me and had written articles saying, obviously this tool is going to be racist because our entire criminal legal system is extremely racist. And so it was very obvious in some very basic sense. But I felt that it needed to be analyzed because there had been no independent analysis of this tool. No one had actually just gone and looked at whether it was predicting correctly, whether these people were going to go on to do future crimes. So I actually collected all the data. It took a year, a team of 4 people, and did that analysis and found, I know you're shocked, that it was biased against Black defendants. And the thing is, that story made a lot of impact because it had data. And so everybody had known this thing, but the data really helped make it actionable. And so that's the one reason I do data-driven work, actually, is because it allows me to tackle those big systemic things that we know are happening, but reframe them in a way that for some reason allows it to become a policy debate. Because for some unknown reason, we just can't have these debates without having our own data set to throw our numbers around with, right? Like, so when they want to deny us rights or whatever, they being like, somebody up there, there'll be studies saying it's all going to be fine. Like, no problem, we're taking away your, reproductive rights, but like nobody needed them, right? Here's a data set showing that.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, on those of us who want to challenge power, I think that bringing data to the table is actually a really great way to do that challenge, because you still need the anecdotes, you still need the human story, but it makes it harder to dismiss. And so I really love the question you have, which is like, let's refocus ourselves on the actual real harms. We know what they are, but let's find better ways to tell those stories. And data is one of them. It's not the only way, but it's one that I found really powerful.
We have time for one final question. I think you had one. Put his hand up first. Sorry.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Adeshino Ayeni. I'm a professional translator. This is not a question, just to touch on what you mentioned about in Mali translating educational content into Bambara. In the industry, as translators, we try as much as possible to do away with machine translation, most especially for low-resource languages, African languages, because there are less data to train the models to have perfect results. So yeah, it's a good thing for them to do that, but I'm sure there will be humans in the back end to check what the translators, the system has done. Yeah. So I'm saying this to encourage everyone here not to do a similar thing and just put up something on Google Translate to generate content, because it's not perfect.
Yes,
Human
obviously.
translation is
I
best.
mentioned that there are stereotypes that they were fighting, that they had to constantly intervene and check that wasn't happening. So
yeah.
I hear you.
All right, thank you.
All right. I think for all of us here at MozFest, we're all engaged in storytelling. We're telling a different story about AI with each other, in conversation with one another. I really hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you for spending time with us here. Please enjoy the content that these wonderful panelists are creating. Please check in with the Mozilla Festival's website, IRL, the project that I'm working on right now, the podcast. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you, Zalana. Thank you, Zalana, for moderating. And join us at 2:30 here again for our final Dialogues and Debates panel about ecology and AI. And also check out the sessions across the venue. We have trees as infrastructure, and also the value of voice on mapping community desires around voice AI. So see you back here in a bit. Bye.